Kathy, if you want to go ahead and just kind of talk about nonprofit fixers and
Yeah.
do a really quick plug, because I'm not really into, I hate doing webinars. It's an hour webinar and the person's still talking about themselves 5 minutes into the webinar. So we're going to do a quick little info on us, Kathy, and then I'll jump into content if everyone's okay with that.
Yeah. So I this is a collaborative of a bunch of consultants that have come together with different kinds of expertise. And we see ourselves, frankly, as fixers. We have a lot of nonprofit experience in fundraising and strategic planning. Juan Figueroa is going to join us. He's done a lot of interim work. We've done mergers. I mean, we've been around the block. I tell everybody in 2019, pre-COVID, there was a moment. I did 102 board retreats in 1 year. So both Donna and I were at the Georgia Center for Nonprofits for 5 years. I was the EVP, so I ran all the consulting membership and training. Eric was a consultant for us. We've done projects. Strategic planning is another thing that's ours, board retreats. We, in this, are looking at a different model of collaborating and putting together kind of the best expertise from our network of consultants and our network of nonprofits. We're looking at building some cohorts. We very much are change agents. We see the sector at a pivotal point post-COVID of lots of changes, technology, AI, generational, the financial, this fiscal cliff, how we fundraise, how we talk to people, how we engage people, just lots of change, how we deliver services. I did focus groups yesterday for a nonprofit and left just like, oh my God, they're going to have to totally change their service model because the community has changed so dramatically. So anyway, lots of change. We're into that, and we're all helping nonprofits navigate that change and figure out how to really, I think we were talking yesterday, we really want nonprofits to be a lot more stable, like to get out of this fiscal crisis. Our goal, we're not going to use sustainability. We're going to talk about stability right now as being a key thing because of the shifts that are going on. So that, and we're pretty spread out across Georgia with us living coast, South, Atlanta, and over in the Northeast. I got that right. We slip into South Carolina on a pretty regular basis. We've slipped over into Alabama a bit too, just because of where we live. So that's us.
And I'm
I'm
just going
sure
to move
we
on.
put it together, we have 200 years of experience,
Yeah,
right?
it's a lot around the table. We work
It
with
is
a
a
lot
lot
of
around the table.
organizations. We fix a lot of things. So I just want to jump on in if that's all right with you. And where this really started to hit me was in 2022. I was working with organizations that were dealing with those were abused. And the funding, despite pumping a lot of money into the sector through all the stimulus money, actually money was being decreased going to victim organizations that serve victims, especially those that had to do the forensic interviewing and the therapy for children that were abused by their family. And then a few organizations, had received some stimulus money that was going away. And so they had this donut hole, right, of money that they had that and was no longer there. So that they came to us, and we did some of these short-term strategies that we looked at. And so we started doing research, with the different universities and analyzing and looking at what was going on with the current funding. And then about a year ago, talking with several foundation leaders, and one of the, we were just calling a nonprofit challenge. And they said, excuse my French, hell, it ain't a challenge, it's a cliff, it's a crisis. And it's hitting us, and it will be hitting us really hard at the end of 2024 and 2025. So we've changed the name of being just a challenge to a crisis, a cliff. Now that sounds scary, but I firmly believe that the things that we're talking about today helps not just in relation to filling this gap from the stimulus money and increasing need, but all these things we're talking about makes you a nonprofit more competitive, right? Not just in this situation dealing with this crisis, but for its future work. So looking at enhancing the competitiveness of the organization in response to the current situation, but at the same time, that competitiveness being able to continue on into the future for the organization. And before I get into the current situation, some of our strategies, I want to play a little productivity game to kind of illustrate. So take a moment right now and just draw 9 dots on a piece of paper, just like this. And I'm your lead funder. And I'm saying these are 9 customers, those in need, that need service. And I'm giving you a limited resource. You've got 9 here, and I'm giving you 4 lines. And what you need to do is serve all of these 9, which bisecting it with the resource, which is the line. So you have 4 lines to be able to bisect and serve all 9 of these people in need. And the other rule is that you can't, once you start drawing the lines, you can't pick up the pen. You can't move it to a different location. So they're all the lines are, connecting one to the other. Does that make sense? So looking at it, how do we, and I know this goes back 30 years ago, so I'm sure a few of you have done, if you've done it, please don't ruin the buzz. But try to serve all 9 with just the 4 lines that I'm giving you. Anybody got it? Are you ready? So what's the solution? Solution is, when you first looked at this, did your mind see a box, a square? Right? The solution requires you to look outside that box, outside, so having to look differently, having to look innovatively, having to look outside the box. And that's the strategies that we will be discussing to deal with this cliff. Just real quick, I just want to kind of level set on what we see as the current situation and get your feedback to see if this is what you all see the same. That we were in a crisis, right? We were in a major crisis, and there were lots of people unemployed, and the major concern about being homeless, right? Evicted, out on the streets. So we appropriately responded with stimulus money, a pretty darn good amount of money that came in through nonprofits. I got 13,000 in PPP, so I took it, right? And I know a lot of organizations took that money and used it well. Unfortunately, our experience is that many took money to go expand into programs that were not their core competence, especially in the area of serving, trying to prevent eviction, trying to prevent homelessness, that organizations went into, expanded the program or greatly expanded their organization to utilize these funds, but then extrapolated their pro forma budget to the future, assuming that money will continue, right? And unfortunately, I know some counties like DeKalb County still has some money that's in the ARP that will be allocated, in the beginning of 2025, but that most of that money. Is everybody? Can you all see the slides?
No. That's what I was worried about. I think you
Oh.
thought they were up and none of us were seeing them.
Okay, sorry.
So the stunned look is I just did a private chat and said, where are your slides?
Okay.
So we're not seeing them. I made you co-host.
Okay,
Did
my
you
bad.
share your screen?
It said share and it wasn't working there. Give me 1 second. I apologize.
You probably didn't share the right thing. You got to get it up on your screen first and then do the share.
Go.
There we go.
Ah, that's better.
It's happening. Yay.
All
Eric,
right. Sorry about
sorry.
that.
Oh, there you go.
So here's the answer. Sorry, you got it from so I was looking at everybody's face saying, wow, why ain't everyone going, wow? Okay, so now you got it. We're looking at something innovative and different. So we got that technical difficulty figured out. Again, looking at a lot of stimulus money was going through. It was right to do that money. Unfortunately, you can't, that money is not ongoing. So, with that funding in mind, we did a lot of research looking at what sort of we believe the current situation now and into the future. And overall, our belief is that there's going to be decreased overall funding for the nonprofits and community work. That, with 35 trillion in debt right now, our current political divisiveness, I haven't found an economist yet that said that we can be able to pull off a federal bailout of nonprofits to help make this happen. That we've seen flat or decreased corporate support. Our work with people that do a lot of CSR work says that sort of the high cost of capital, that they're reducing the money that they give away, that they're leaning more toward how to give to the community by increasing employee volunteerism, so less cash. That traditionally was about 5% of annual budgets each year when you're looking at nationally. We've seen increased giving from, collectively from individuals, but what that increase is really is a McKinsey, Scott, and a few others writing big checks. That the overall individual giving has decreased and decreased for 2 years. The annual Giving USA Giving came out and it said another decline this year and anticipating another decline next year. And that usually accounts for about 80%. So that's a major portion of budget. From the foundations I've talked to, some are increasing some of their giving because they've changed their endowment, but most from our experience and from our conversations are flat or decreased support. So we've got, the stimulus money going away, or other sources of funding are declining. So less financial resources will be available for the nonprofits, at the end of this year, and most likely even more so in 2025. At the same time, what we've got going on is what we believe is more need, that sort of high debt, interest rates, and prices, that more people are in need. Years ago, Bill Bowling started the Atlanta Community Food Bank, used to always say that the food bank and homeless prevention organizations are the canary in the coal mine for the nonprofit sector. And our recent visit with Kyle Wade at the Community Food Bank has said that they've experienced a 66% increase in the last 2 years. We met with St. Vincent de Paul, that they've experienced a 50% increase on those coming to them. So we've got more people coming. We've got what I would predict is a soft landing in the economy, right? But a soft landing is a soft landing for the rest of us, is a hard landing for those most in need. So even though the economy is not going to go likely into a recession, those that have been traditionally marginalized will be the ones that are most impacted from the current economic environment that we see will proceed, through mid-2025. And we're also experiencing, we've been blessed to do a lot of work outside of Atlanta, and that we're seeing increases in poverty outside of Atlanta, and also they didn't receive as equal amount of funding from the ARPA and other funds. So they're seeing increases, especially increases in homelessness, without any resources that they have. So from looking at the pure facts, talking with experts at Georgia Tech and UGA and Georgia State, that they predict the essence of all this is that for the next year, 2, maybe even 3 years, that essentially nonprofits will have to be doing more with less funding. And what we are, the other experience that we've seen over the response to COVID is, how can I describe this? Seasoned executives, EDs, CEOs are retiring earlier than planned. And then when you talk to them, it's like, okay, I've been doing this for 26 years. I had to go through COVID. I had to stay open. I had to serve more. And now I come back at the end of COVID and now I've got less resources. So we see a lot taking earlier retirement. And in recent transitions, looking to replace an ED, we're also finding that it's harder to find a good executive director to replace one that's been there a while, especially if they have any fundraising expertise or skills. We did one at the very beginning of 2024, and we started advertising it in 2023, the end of 2023, and that we had to raise the salary 18% to be able to get somebody with decent fundraising experience. More people going out and fundraising to try to fill this donut has increased what costs are for fundraising and for those with fundraising expertise. So we have more need, less funding. We'll have retiring earlier executive leaders, which makes things challenging. We have to look not just organizationally, but the sector. We can't continue the status quo that we're looking at. We must look at things in a more innovative way. Now, we've done a lot of work and a lot of research on this. What I want to hear from you all is, what do you think about this assessment? From what you see, are we correct in what we, in our overall assumption that, rest of this year, next year, and probably 2026, that nonprofits are going to have to serve more need with less resources and maybe less leadership? What are your thoughts? And how have you all been impacted?
Anybody want to?
I'll go ahead and chime in if that's all right.
Yeah, anybody.
Sure. Well, the short answer is yes, vigorous nodding, in agreement of everything that you said. A lot of the groups that I'm working with, especially, increase the level of staff that they had with the funding that they received through COVID. There are some groups who are going, hey, if we don't get some grants or seriously increase our donations, then we're going to have to lay off 2, 3, 4 staff members. And then some of those same folks who I'm working with happen to be in the area of South Carolina that is not going to have power until tomorrow at the earliest. And so they're at the edge of this fiscal cliff from post-COVID relief. And now there's this, another 1,000-year flood that we seem to be getting every 10 years now for some reason. And it just really seems like it's just one thing after another. I'm seeing I really like the point that you brought up about people with a lot of experience in the field retiring and it being very difficult to replace those folks. Oftentimes those are the people who founded the organization in the first place. And there's a whole lot of, insert soapbox here about founder syndrome and how that can really impact an organization's ability to move forward. I mean, I know of one organization that I used to help that actually folded because the COVID years caused their founder to be too burnt out to continue. And then they tried to make it work after that person left and they had to close. Their last week of providing services was this last week. So I'm definitely seeing this. I'm seeing this in a lot of areas.
And
I think I observed too that not only did we get federal money directly, the nonprofits that I work with, but they also, the city, the state, and United Way got federal money and they couldn't disperse it. So they added that on. So nonprofits had multiple sources of federal money coming in that also all dried up because it dried up for the city, it dried up for the county, it dried up for United Way. I mean, it's like a triple or quadruple hit rather than just the Fed money went away.
And I
And
forgot.
and I'm seeing a lot of the added staff and added services that Eric talked about. Somebody else was starting and I cut him off.
Anybody else? And I also wanted to get your
I-
thoughts on
I
what.
guess, Eric, just a second. I guess, you know, I see this maybe a little bit differently because, you know, from where I sit, not all nonprofits are in one bucket. And there's a lot of diversity among them in terms of who they serve, you know, what their goals are, what their sizes, with their, you know, with their ages. And some have, you know, missions and boards and budgets that are not, unstable. And so I'm not exactly sure what part, you know, what segment of nonprofits you're really talking about here.
Yeah, Terry, you are a mind reader because that was going to segue to my next question is what sectors that you all are seeing this. From our experience, it's been those that were hit immediately are the ones that are most impacted that are coming to us saying we're going to have to close our door down, are those that are in the homeless prevention, homeless services, food banks, et cetera, that are seeing that both, they're the ones that are hitting the real double whammy right now of deep, you know, we no more of those funds. At the same time, we're seeing a big increase showing up at the same door right now.
But on the other hand, there's also homeless organizations like Georgia Works that, you know, we're always looking for, you know, for more money, and there's always more need. And, you know, there's this, you know, the shift to, you know, housing people out of the criminal justice, you know, system. So they're changing, but they didn't, you know, the money that they got from, you know, the COVID monies were, you know, used for the purposes that they, you know, they were given. And, you know, they're outside the box. They have earned income for the men, you know, after the initial program, you know, they're working and they're paying for, you know, for part of their housing. And so this big sweep, you know, what is it about the organizations that are not on the cliff, you know, or
I think
more
there are
of the
two
cliff
things,
than they've
Terry.
ever been versus the ones that, you know, are.
So Terry, I see two things in my practice. One, during COVID, I think they did some mission creep. They took on a bunch of services that they didn't traditionally provide. They weren't at their core. And boards like to call it mission creep. I think that's a really derogatory term. I happen to hate it. But let's just say they extended themselves to meet community need in areas they didn't do before. And they got overextended, as Corinne said, and now they can't pay for those things.
So those that are overly reliant on single sources. So the solutions are, you know, diversifying fundraising, and we'll get into those. We're also seeing the arts and entertainment organizations that were hit very strongly because they never rebounded from, you know, in terms of patrons and visitors coming back. And we know, and here in Atlanta, that there are, you know, a group of arts organizations that are secretly getting together and been, you know, going to foundations basically saying, if you don't give us more money, we're going to shut down. And I feel for them, but, you know, that, you know, going to foundations and saying, if you don't give us money, we're going to shut down is just not a super great strategy. I don't know. Yeah. Corinne. Yeah.
So arts-based organizations are one of my specialties.
Uh-huh.
And some of the feedback that I got from folks is that with these art-based organizations going to, say, their statewide nonprofit coalition, different things like that, where apparently they're getting feedback from these foundations, from the coalition of nonprofits, et cetera, in their state saying, you know, look, the arts are great, but we got to focus on these immediate needs. And so it's a lot of folks who would typically use these resources, use these foundations as a source. I think a lot of foundations and a lot of these other statewide resources are kind of moving towards wanting to address those immediate crises versus the arts. And so it's really an area where there's a lot of discussion about what are the arts just not on trend to be funded right now? What's going on? That is a huge piece, especially for that sector. Absolutely.
I had dinner a couple weeks ago with couple foundations, you know, and they're like going, do I give more money to the Atlanta Community Food Bank to feed people because they're running out of food to give, or do I fund the arts organizations that are coming to me? And it's putting them in a very difficult position, in a very big decision. And, you know, I love the arts, but if I was in that situation, I'd rather fund the food bank than arts, but that's just me. So I think we're on the same page. So let's start looking at some solutions to help make that happen. And I always think these are short-term solutions and long-term strategies. The first one that we started doing in the end of 2022 and beginning of 2023 was activate your board, right? Everybody wants the board to be more engaged. You know, every situation analysis I've done for every nonprofit in 27 years, one of the top issues is I want my board to be more engaged in speaking for the organization and fundraising, right? And well, now is the time that you really need to do that. And I think it's not just activating the board in terms of fundraising, but activating the board as an ambassador, of a spokesperson, of telling the story into the community. And some of this is better strategies that we've done before this cliff that we think fit right now is start with that, you know, 100% giving, board giving. And from talking to all the foundations that I know, that's an expectation, right? If you're coming to us to try to fill that void, I need to see some skin in the game. And that skin in the game needs to be 100% board giving at the time. You know, engage the board in fundraising. My wife has been doing fundraising for 30 years, and she's a introvert, you know, she couldn't sell ice cubes to anybody. But, you know, it's all relationship building. It is relationship building, not sales. And if we, you know, take out that anxiety of, wait a minute, you want me to sell a product to my best friends in my network, which creates anxiety with every board. And so what we did 27 years ago with Habitat, you know, you figure everybody knows about Habitat, right? You know, it's a well-known brand. And then we asked the board, why aren't you going out and fundraising and telling the story? And it's like, because we don't know what to say. Oh, wait a minute, it's fun. It's Habitat. You don't know what to say. So what the first things we always do with an organization is create some common bulleted talking points, very short way that a board can start engaging, educating the community, telling stories, telling the impact, telling the great things they do, and telling that to their friends. So it's a process of relationship building. Also, what we did with Habitat was Sue Whelan was on the board. She brought in all the annual letters to thank people and several bottles of wine to the board meeting and said, you're not leaving this board meeting until a few of you sign these letters and agree to be able to follow up in relationship building. So begin the process of it's relationship building. It's not sales. So getting them used to doing that fundraising, giving the board a revenue goal of their own, collectively, individually, both, you know, give and or get. Ensure that fundraising is in the board job description, in the board agreement. I can't tell you how many nonprofits that we've got said, well, you know, we're having a challenging time finding board members, so we recruit them on. We don't want to tell them they have to give, but then they come on and then we tell them they have to give. So be upfront on those expectations in doing that. And I think one of the greatest investments that a nonprofit can do in term initial investment is provide fundraising training for board members. You know, give them the tools they need to feel good about being a spokesperson for the organization and in relationship building, quote unquote, not sales. So I know we've got a bunch of fundraisers on this, so I'm going to throw it to you all. What do you think about this? Are we missing anything? Any advice to give to nonprofits and on the first step of activating those around the table, the board, to begin to fill some of this void? Of course it can't. It's not enough. It wasn't working. It didn't fill the void in 2022, 2023. It's not this year, but it's a start. So any of you all fundraisers, any thoughts, comments? Are we missing anything?
So Eric, I'll jump in and reiterate the how important it is to have the talking points for the board. But I think in times like this, like my area also hit very hard by this recent storm. So already facing a lean year, busy year, now an election year. Now we have massive hurricane damage all across the area. And all my clients have called and said, okay, Donna, what now? And I'm having to pivot with them because these board members are not ready, right? Since COVID, I've noticed, the engagement level has not returned for board members. So my strategy, and I don't know whether it's going to work, but I'm going to do this for them. So when I first started in my career, I just pushed through and said, well, if they're not going to go ask, I'll go do it and I'll give them the credit. And I think as fundraisers, we all are going to have to put our boots back on and go hit the ground and do more than we expected in terms of that relationship building. So I'm looking at the talking points as, that's definitely step one. Step two is actually going with the board member on a call and then carrying the water, but giving the board member the credit so that it looks a little easier. They get more comfortable because it wasn't as hard as they expected. But I think that training is going to have to be one-on-one instead of more traditional, during a strategy session or a board meeting. I think we're all going to have to really get in there and go do some of this work. Now, as a consultant, I think that looks a little different for all of us, right? But for development teams, and I think, Corinne, I think you might have been the one that mentioned this about the leadership vacuum, like when the founders are leaving and we're getting less experienced staff. To me, a lot of the development staff that I'm working with now, they don't have the confidence or the experience to go make the ask. So I think we're going to have to train up to the board level and take them. And if you're a consultant, we're going to have to train sideways and down with our clients to get these new staff members ready to go and do some of this work. So I see big challenges, but I think it's also really positive for me if we can all figure out how to pivot and move and work in that space as staff members and consultants, where we go do some of this and train on a one-on-one level. I think we're going to get the experience and the comfort levels back where they are so that this is easier in 25. Or that's my plan and strategy. I don't know if it works, but I'll keep you guys posted. Anybody have any thoughts on the inexperienced staffers that you either have as a development professional in your organization or a CEO or as a consultant?
I can chime in here. So I don't know if I mentioned this in the intro, but my day job is I do our philanthropy for Boeing here in South Carolina. So I work with a lot of fundraisers, and so I have a revolving door of executive directors who keep wanting to put their new person in front of me, and I honestly had to stop. I was like, if I meet with every organization's new fundraiser, that is the only thing I will be doing. So, and yeah, often they are very green. In the reason that I joined the call today is for the organization for which I'm the board chair, and we do not have a development person and have not had one for about a year, but haven't had a good one in 2 years because we could not find someone to fill the role, and then we thought we might have the opportunity to maybe, instead of looking for a seasoned person, maybe we might find someone who is a little earlier in their career and train them up. And boy, that just didn't work. So it's been a huge challenge. And another thing that's just kind of been going through my mind as Eric, I've been listening to you speak, is that it's interesting that what you're saying is actually true across sectors. That is very much an issue that we're dealing with here in our company. Massive departure of experienced people, and seeing just a less experienced workforce overall coming in, and it's changed the dynamic a lot. So it's not just true for nonprofits. Of course, the way we deal with that, may be different, and the ripple effect of that may be different, but it's absolutely true across the board.
Yeah, I think we have a collective fatigue, burnout, right? Is a term that I just keep seeing, and it's really impacting leaders, especially leaders in fundraising. So that's a perfect segue to the next one of looking to really invest more in fundraising. Now, the big challenge when I had this and the training, Donna, that you were talking about, is I did this presentation to the Southeast, the Grantmakers Alliance in South Carolina, and a lot of the smaller community foundations are saying, well, most of the organizations I fund can't afford to have a development person that they, it's so weird, several years ago, even shortly before COVID, even in the beginning of COVID, if you were an organization that had like $1 million or something, you could afford a decent development person. And we have got a bunch of clients right now that are at $1 million budgets that can't afford an experienced, good fundraiser kind of stuff. And so what we are, what we think and what some to recommend is that you're going to have to probably start out with, subcontracting that out to a consultant. We have not been successful in being able to recruit a development director, with experience and skill sets in all areas of fundraising for organizations up to $1 million. We just have not been successful at it. And so looking at, we're also talking with Together SC about having webinars like this that are accessible by the small organizations on sort of the basics of fundraising 101. And like you're right, Donna, the real answer is the one-on-one training, but until somebody can afford to do that, or a foundation or collective of foundations said, hey, we want to invest in trying to get this capacity and funding this capacity into the smaller organizations, I'm worried. I don't know. I don't have an answer for it at this point in time. And so also when I met with all the community foundations in South Carolina, I threw out that first pitch saying, hey, reach out to your community foundation to see if they'll invest in some capacity in your organization around fundraising. And the other recommendations we have is, to be able to allocate more of the time of the executive director to be engaged in fundraising. Really looking at, like we said, the ones that I think, Terry, that are hit the most are ones that aren't diversified in their funding streams, those that are overly reliant on grants, especially and/or government funding, are the ones that were hit the most and are most impacted. So, as my wife has said for years, with every client we work with, somewhere around 70% of all money used in nonprofits, it comes from individuals. So really looking at that individual giving, and hopefully being able to tie that to the board that's happening. What we also, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it, is looking for opportunities to better engage business in its giving. And we'll give some strategies on how to make that do better. Well, also looking at is more earned income. We're seeing a trend over the last several years of organizations that provided services completely free that are going to a sliding scale payment option. And where I first experienced this was the Georgia Center for Children, which is now the Georgia Center for Child Advocacy. And they were, all the counseling that they provided was totally free, but they had a 50% no-show rate. And when they started, and this was like 23 years ago, so they just started charging like $1, $5 for the counseling, and it went from 50% no show to 10% no show. There is a Good Samaritan in Gwinnett County. We have a couple of federally qualified health centers that are going to this of charging on a fee-based. I know that it's controversial in some places, but from our experience, in that it's been effective in making things work out. Also, part of this strategy is, if you're going to be fundraising, is you have to be able to show that you're being successful. You have to have metrics to show that you're producing the outcomes so that you can get fundraising. You can go to the Tall Foundation and try to seek funding from the Tall Foundation. And let's see here, just one other thing I wanted to touch upon. Any other thoughts about how organizations that are so challenged with limited resources on how to better invest? Basically, this is an investment to bring in more money to diversify that funding stream, which is the ultimate solution, is that diversification, so you're not over reliant on a funding source. Any thoughts, feedback on how to better do, how that we can make that happen, especially in the smaller to mid-sized organizations?
I think that we need to be really careful with the earned income piece, because it can be very easy to unintentionally cross lines into unrelated business income, and then, okay, now you have to actually think about paying taxes on this stuff. I mean, I'm not saying that people shouldn't do it. It is just an area of, okay, well, maybe they would need to invest in some more financial advice or tax accounting advice that they also are not able to afford, different things like that. And it's just it's a part of a solution, but then there is also the, okay, but let's make sure that we're doing this legally so that we don't cause even more problems for ourselves or mess up our tax exempt status, that sort of thing. It is definitely kind of this chicken or egg thing of, okay, great, we need to invest in fundraising, but also we need to fundraise to have the money to invest in fundraising.
Yeah.
But we don't know how to fundraise yet. That's why we're talking to you, but we can't afford to hire you yet. That is that chicken egg conversation is what keeps things interesting in my 9 to 5.
Yeah, we've yet to come up with the perfect solution, and I actually think some of these longer term strategies may have to be employed, especially for the organizations that are stuck in that we don't have any funds to invest in fundraising, so that we can have more funds to do more work, that kind of stuff, and being stuck in that loop, which has been very concerning for us. This is going back to what Kathy said. We don't want to use the word mission creep, right? And it's a very good point. But we all feel that some organizations have expanded beyond their core competency. And I know the word competition is a dirty word in nonprofits, but it is, right? We're competing for board members, for funders, for staff members, for community knowledge and awareness. So here's my soapbox that on ways that a nonprofit need to think a little bit more like a business. But there's also, I think, a lot of opportunities where a business needs to think like a nonprofit too. But of knowing your competitive advantage, your niche, what you uniquely do better than competitors. And when people say, well, Eric, what is a competitor? We do something unique, compared to others. So we don't have any competitors. What I always say is organizations the community perceives as similar, not that you perceive as similar, but the community, and also the community foundation, your lead foundations in where you live, those that they say you perceive to be similar. And and here is where I think that we need to pare down. And I think some organizations will have to, unfortunately, cut some programs, cut down to the essence, the things that they do that make the most unique and make a unique impact in the community. I think paring down will make you more competitive for fundraising. If this is what we do, and we do this uniquely different. And then I'm also a firm believer that whatever you do uniquely, what is your competitive advantage, what you do, your core competence, is that you go out and promote it, right? You say, we are darn good at such and such. We convened recently, at the end of last year, several homeless service providers is serving the downtown. And that out of the end product was each service provider knew what they did uniquely different than the other service providers, and then communicated that outward. And but then collectively was going to the business community through Central Atlanta Progress to get funding to serve the collective need. So to, separately, this is what we do best, and some of them pared down back to the essence, and thinking about how to maintain that competitive advantage moving forward on that, into the future, putting that into your planning, your strategic plan. How do we continue that? So it's knowing that niche, communicating, celebrating that niche, having a dialogue before with others, like we did here in Atlanta, to everybody sort of knows that niche. So when you go out and communicate that niche, you're not upsetting the others. Wait a minute, no, having clearly know what differentiates what similar service providers, and all collectively communicating that to better understand. Because what we found out was the business community in Atlanta didn't know which of the different service providers, what they did, and what they did uniquely different compared to the others. And the last short-term strategy is prove your outcomes, right? I've been blessed to have a great relationship with Tom Chappell, who was the head of evaluation at the CDC. The ultimate, he called the ultimate logic model geek. He was there in 1995 with getting the United Way to switch to the logic model. So basically, the logic model is just really linking resources to outcomes, not outputs. And that our conversations with over the last 2 years on this subject matter is that foundations are wanting to see that those outcomes, that your logic model, and being able to, show that you are actually achieving upon that outcome. I believe, and what Tom has always said is looking at the very last bullet of imperfect evaluation is better than none at all. Start with the outcomes that you're able to track. And then I learned a long time ago from Bobby Cleveland, who used to be at the Toll Foundation, who was the most scientific person I've seen, wanting data and science, that if what you do, if you do something, and if, for instance, if you're working with youth or marginalized community, well, let me kind of go back, I'm sorry. We did a food as medicine project at Grady, and we were able to prove that through this process that those that went through the program were eating healthier. And then there's research that says if you're eating healthier, you are healthier. So they were able to say, if we do A, and there's science that said if you do A leads to B, that you can communicate that you are accomplishing B, leading to healthy. So, it's always greater value when you have a third-party evaluation for it. Not many people can afford, really good evaluation, has been my experience. And I also would have continually told to me from Tom Chappell is just don't use evaluation to have outcomes to report to your funders. Use evaluation to be able to enhance your program and be able to perfect and increase and improve upon the effectiveness of your program. So not just getting surveys, but getting feedback one-on-one with those you serve to be able to learn, how to continue to enhance your services that will then produce a better impact, that you have a better outcome to be able to promote, that will hopefully make you more competitive when seeking grants. Overall questions, thoughts, reflections related to the short-term strategies. And we talked about what
Eric, I have one thing about, as people are replacing CEOs who might be retiring, from my perspective, coming from a business school, I see a lot of business people wanting to make the shift, and that's scary to me. In some ways, because well, you know all the potential difficulties, but it seems to me that there's a very important training possibility available for people who want to make this shift. Because just like I often see when our students are doing your job for free, in these pro bono classes that I run, we find that, there's such a lack of business acumen among so many of the among some of the nonprofit leaders. And so we want to fix, you've been working on trying to fill that gap. But I think we need to prepare for the gap of the people coming from the private sector into the public sector and what they don't know about that sector, and running their boards, running development, and also about mission. So anyway, just a comment.
Yeah, me and Kathy were talking in answer to this, that everything goes through cycles, right? That we keep seeing cycles that go through that, and usually the cycles in nonprofits kind of coincide with cycles related to the economy or something major drastically that occurs within, if we have some major catastrophe or something happens, people step up, individuals, others step up and fund, right? And then they get burnout. And so that funding decreases, but the organizations still have to do work. So there's always this ebb and flow, this cycle. And we also see the cycle related to people wanting to switch. I remember right after 9/11, everybody was like, oh, I want to do good for society. And we had so many business people come to us and say, we want to be CEOs. And I think there was maybe about, I don't know, 10, 50% success rate on that. Most of them got there and realized I don't have 2 executive assistants. And I have to do all this stuff by myself, that they quietly resigned, stepped down, retired, kind of stuff. So I still think it's a great opportunity. And maybe the lessons learned is that we need to better prepare those that want to make that transition from corporate, to do good in society. And then we saw, after the 2008, the Great Recession, same thing. In that, we're seeing a little bit of that right now. It's, we're going through COVID. Oh my heavens, I want to do something better. I want to do something more impactful in society. So that's a great point, Terry.
I think, Terry, too, I've worked with a bunch of organizations where the board had a founder and then went way corporate and got a corporate business person to come in and run it. And then they're in shock. And the 3 things you mentioned, they struggle with mission, really struggle with asking for money, like they got to go beg, and they're not used to that. And then managing the board, those 3 things that you mentioned, I've seen a number of times. And then that person lasts about 18 months because it's all shaken up. And then the board sort of brings in a 3rd person that's got some of both. But we would better serve if we could train some of those business people with good hearts to how to do some of those 3 things. They might last longer than that 18-month and serve the organization better.
But generally, the transition from founder to professional CEO is fraught with problems, whether it's a business person or, an established nonprofit, leader. And so,
yeah, I know. I'm a 9-time founder of nonprofits. I've done 9 nonprofits in my career. I'm a founder expert, and I consult with a lot of founders. I'm doing one right now that's a hot mess transition. So I get that. It's just when the board goes overboard on the business side, sometimes it'll go overboard on the funding side. They pick something really different than the founder, and that becomes fraught. And they tend not to last no matter what.
Right. And remember, the board is made up of business people who prioritize their own expertise and will tend to choose people who look like them.
Right.
And so it's a dilemma.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're seeing some organizations with that, predominantly corporate board sort of overreacting in a way related to the situation. How can, we've got we got some consultants on here, we got others. What else can nonprofit consultants do to help help within these, other than things we've talked about? Any thoughts?
Eric, I have a thought on your first point and your most recent question. In terms of some other kind of out of the box thinking that could be sort of an immediate response, just something we've done in the organization that I'm working with right now. We are leasing out some of our space since we have kind of poured up some of our services and have some office space that we're not utilizing. Now we do own our building. So we are leasing out some space, which has been enormously helpful. We're actually also looking at selling our building and leasing it back from the tenant, which is a very particular situation that wouldn't work in most cases. But leasing space. And then we're also working with another organization to share a finance person and a facilities person. So a way for us to alleviate some stress on other staff, but still make it affordable, which has been really interesting and so far is going well. In terms of working with consultants and how consultants can help best, this is going to be from where I sit in my day job. I will say, that one thing that I love about working with consultants, like I just had a great conversation with a fundraising consultant yesterday, is that if I can build a really solid relationship with one consultant who represents a lot of nonprofits and they know our mindset about funding, then they can sort of bring to me the organizations that they already know are the right fit. And so that's not going to be right for all consultants. Like I'm not, since I don't know any of you, I can say this freely. Like, I don't want people throwing spaghetti against the wall. That's a waste of my time. But if somebody is like actually really has taken the time to get to know how we fund, our mindset of funding, oh my gosh, they're worth their weight in gold.
So somebody who's got real solutions and they're not using cut and paste with working with you, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a great point. Yeah, the more things challenge to get. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more consultants come in doing that cut and paste. Or, we had experience on this, but we haven't had experience in being a consultant. And I'm bringing the solution that I had from when I was in my organization that I think will apply to everywhere. So cut and paste, I am personally seeing some really bad plans out there right now. Oh my heavens. But that's just my bias. I mean, horrible plans. Oh my God, sorry.
Well, you're also seeing a lot of people going, who liked the idea of working from home and now they're having to go back to work and now they think, oh, I'll be a consultant.
That lunch I had, that dinner I had with foundations, I can't remember, somebody brought a thing of, it was like where all these that are retiring, these seasoned CEOs, founders are going into consulting. And so we're actually talking to several of those to kind of bring them into this consortium, right, with their subject matter expertise, that we can take that subject matter expertise and use our facilitation skills to try to get those in a non-cut and paste way with organizations. The one thing that hit me doing this right now is advocacy, right? I don't see it. I see it sort of as in between a short-term and a long-term strategy. Like I said, with the homeless service providers collectively asking for money from businesses through Central Atlanta Progress here in Atlanta, of collectively working together on collaborative grants, collaborative advocating, collaboratively explaining, especially those sectors that are being hurt the most from that, received a good percentage of and or expanded their services, got into new programs and services in response to that money that was going in to prevent homelessness, those large sums of money. So let's look at long-term strategies. And these are the ones that I'm actually excited about. I talked about, you pick what you do best, pare down to what you do best, do that and partner with others. And that could be a collaboration, but I personally feel that, and what Kathy was we were talking about before we got started was that we see all this need. So what do people do when they see need? Hey, they start a new nonprofit, right? And then we're seeing this okay, we have less resources, but we have more people starting nonprofits going on right now. And it always happens after every major crisis or situation or some trauma that goes on. People say, I want to change the world. I'm going to start my own nonprofit. And so we're seeing an increase in nonprofits. My bias, and y'all can yell at me about this, and it's been my bias for 25 years, is that there are too many nonprofits right now. It's too fragmented. There are too many organizations that have great programs, beautiful programs, but don't have the capacity, the infrastructure, the leadership to really scale or grow those programs. So what we're advocating for is more formalized methods of partnering together. And here's a continuum of different levels of partnerships, strategic partnerships. Going from the left to the right is, there's no change. There's a lot of autonomy. Farther to the right, a little less autonomy. On top, we're dealing with the operational running of the organization, opportunities. Down below, more program things to do. And, from the left, the collaboration, I used to call it the United Way collaboration. Back in the 90s, United Way required you to sign a paper, on your grant saying that you were going to collaborate. And so what we have here in Atlanta that would meet at Thumbs Up or another restaurant that a lot of people go to in the nonprofit sector, they would get together, sign it, come back together next year, sign it again. But it really wasn't changing much in what was going on, and luckily United Way figured that out and changed that process. And what I'm saying, is that we need to be looking more down in this area of partnerships. Here's collaboration. These are, joint venture alliances. And here, parent subsidiary merger consolidation is a consolidation, bringing the two organizations together. In my communication with foundations in the last 2 years, that they're very interested in seeing organizations want to pursue these partnerships, including mergers, but aren't forcing or requiring, which is right. We don't want a funder to dictate how a nonprofit runs. So we are seeing interest in funding more formalized partnerships. Aaron, I like your talk about this sharing, and that we years ago we did a management service organization where it was sharing of space and sharing of backroom operational kind of things. And I view this whole continuum sort of as a relationship that leads to a marriage, right? And how many times, I don't know many people that, dated twice and went to Vegas, right? Started here, and 2 days later we're in Vegas getting married. I don't know, you all may know some folk like that, but that this is a building process of relationship building. And what we've done with many organizations is started them something in a joint program or more formalized joint venture with, where they're delivering the programs together with very defined memorandums of understanding agreements, and or the sharing of sharing of accounting, sharing of finances, sharing of all the operational things that are needed to support nonprofits, which are often, when you look at most strategic plans and you look at the areas that are needing improvement, the top key strategic issues, they're usually around these support issues, right? Fundraising, operations, better use of technology, etc. And it's unfortunately not enough around enhancing programming, doing a better continuum of care of working together. Now, what we like to do in this process is don't that purpose and desired outcomes should drive the structure. Just recently, we were involved in 2 organizations that the two board members from the two different organizations were at a fundraiser and had a couple cocktails together. And they said, well, we should merge our two organizations together. So they bring it together to the staff. We decided over a couple cocktails in Buckhead that we want these two organizations to merge. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. So what if you're pursuing a more formalized partnership, and if anybody wants more details on this, we don't have time to get into it, but working together to determine what is the shared outcomes that you want to accomplish. If you want to accomplish cost savings and some economies of scale from bringing operations together, but then you also want to do a better continuum of care for those you serve, that the ultimate option is a merger or a consolidation. But there are many different variations of this, a parent subsidiary, to where, that you still have some autonomy with the subsidiary. So there's various options. So you don't have to necessarily jump from collaboration to consolidation. But we feel very strongly that organizations, and we have 3 right now that see it in July of 2025, that's where the big gap is going to come, that the end of their stimulus money come. So they are beginning conversations with partners to look at a possible, one of these more formalized partnerships. And the process to do this, I won't go through all the details of it because we don't have time, is it is basically a feasibility assessment. And that's what they're looking at right now, where they first begin looking at internally, what do we want to get out of a partnership? What outcomes, both in terms of our operational outcomes, our financial outcomes, but then the outcomes that we want to accomplish related to program outcomes, how we serve. So getting clarity on what you want to accomplish from that partnership, knowing what you bring to the table, right? Having clarity on that and determining if you're ready to explore a more detailed partnership. And then with clarity of what you want to accomplish, what you're looking for in quote unquote a partner, a mate, somebody to marry, that you are then better prepared to begin conversation. So what we're doing is we're doing this internal assessment right now, and then we are going out and doing some matchmaking, exploring with some partners that we think are a great partnership, just to explore the viability of this. What I'm concerned about, what we're worried about, is that organizations are going to wait until the end, wait until we're out of money. Let's go to find a partner. And thinking about it in a relationship, a marriage state, how many people you want to marry that come to you and say, I'm completely broke, I got no money. If you don't marry me, I'm going to have to shut down or I'll be on the streets. Boy, that's a perfect dating scenario, isn't it? So coming from a point of strength and having better clarity of instead of doing this for just survival, but how do we actually do a better job of serving the outcomes in the community? So start with this is where I recommend doing for any organization, your organization or in organizations you're serving that are really impacted by this fiscal cliff. Before I jump to the other one, are there, do you know anybody right now that's interested in this, or your organization's interested or thinking about this longer term solution, this longer term strategy? Anybody?
From what I've seen, this kind of seems to be a very taboo topic.
Yes.
In a lot of the groups that I'm working with. Like, it almost seems like a sign of failure of, oh no, it's because we have to fold. Okay, we have to, this other organization is better than us. Okay, they win, so we have to get absorbed into them. It's a very, very sticky, delicate thing that a lot of people are very, very opposed to. Again, like, people who found organizations, like, that's their baby. They don't want to share their baby with other people. And it's a very it's something that, like, for example, when I do nonprofit setups and things like that, my first meeting with folks is usually trying to convince people to not hire me to start a nonprofit. It's essentially how the meeting goes, of just, okay, give me a lot of really good reasons why do you actually need to start a whole separate legal entity, or do you just have a really good program idea that you want to work with? Is there any possibility that any of these other organizations in your area could adopt your idea? But everyone, again, wants to have their baby, wants to realize their own mission. And I don't think I've actually really spoken with anybody who approaches the idea of doing a merger or something like that until
we've learned never, when we're in this process as a consultant, we never say the word merger, that we look to get clarity, because it is a 4-letter word. And especially because it is my baby, and you literally have to have these conversations with it, is that we walk through that, that first phase of clarifying what you do well, what you're not doing well, why you need to partner, what are the outcomes you want to get from that partnership, what you bring to the table. And then we have a decision-making chart that once you decided on those outcomes, that you walk down the outcomes, and that the clients, the partners, they're the ones that always say, you know what, maybe we should think about a merger. Then, I just play dumb old country boy. Merger, I never thought about that. Well, let's consider that. But yes, never bring up the word merger to start out the conversation, because it will chase people the other way. Our experience been from doing 9 of these is everyone's worried about losing control. Everyone's worried about people not, if you bring the two together, your current funders are going to fund less, right? If you got 10,000 from United Way from both of you, bring the two together, United Way is going to just give you 15,000. It's never happened. That actually, if you can prove that you coming together, whatever form that is, are producing, 1 + 1 = 2.5 or 3, that new funders come to the table. Foundations do not decrease funding, that most of them increase funding, because you're able to show a greater impact for the resources. So they see it as a good investment. So if you, started out not merger and looking at it as a greater impact, that it actually presents itself collectively as an opportunity for more funds, as opposed to less funds. And we've never, ever seen one of these where they did not get a lot more funding as a management service organization, a joint venture, or a merger. So we've got a bunch of tips and stuff. If you want to help make that happen, to do things, we're happy to share with you and have the organizations think about it. We also think a great way to be able to address this fiscal cliff is being able to take good things that are working well and scaling them. Something, an innovative program, and scaling it. And some of the tips that we have with looking at scaling innovation is create what's it called? Design theory, design theory thinking, working, now scale. They now call it creating the minimal viable product. And co-creating that with those that you're serving. Don't try to create some massive program. Start with something that you co-create, something new, innovative, with those that you serve, through the design thinking process, and do it on a small scale. Show that scale works, and prove successful. An example that we did several years ago was an organization doing construction workforce development, and that we did a pilot test, which then became West Side Works in Atlanta, co-created how we were going to get people involved in the West Side to be involved in building the Mercedes-Benz Stadium Dome. So started small with one small project, and then proving the success was then be able to then go through these next step of developing a plan and for replication, measuring the impact right from the start, especially with clarity of outcomes, We had an example where it was a small organization, small product, a small, new product program that worked well and then received funding. I'm not going to say whose foundations did the funding, but the foundations had a much greater expectation of, they expected you to scale like a business and that you would be able to scale and grow, like growing from one Home Depot to a whole bunch of Home Depots. Oh, I gave up who funded it. Sorry. And so there were different expectations of what that growth would be. And so that, which led to some conflict and tension, because not being able to meet an unrealistic expectation of growth of a nonprofit, that the for-profit wanted to see grow at the rate that their nonprofit grew at its level of growth and success. A couple of things that we've learned from this that you really need to take into consideration is that it is harder. Everybody underestimates the challenges of rapid growth in a nonprofit. We've been, nonprofits have been spending all this time trying to figure out how to get funding to grow. And then when you're given a whole bunch of money to grow, they always think, oh, that's easy. Now we've got the money. And it's everyone that I've seen do this always underestimates the challenges of rapid growth, especially in the terms of operations and HR. Always underestimate. And then what they always underestimate is we've had this young, growing entrepreneurial culture that first got it started. Now we're scaling up, we're bringing in new people, and then very quickly, if you're not being intentional in bringing new people into the culture, very quickly becomes the old versus the new culture, us versus them. The people that were there at the beginning saying, we don't, these new people don't know how we got things done. And then the new people saying, well, the older people aren't want to change quick enough, the staff that's been here a while. So spend the resources, the time and energy of looking at the bringing people together, keeping that culture, looking to build upon the culture that you have, and then anticipating the expectations of the HR that's needed in the operations, and make some of these changes first. Don't jump into the growth. Create those initial HR changes and operations that are needed to help make that happen. And the last one I want to touch upon is business. Better engaging business via what we call corporate social responsibility. And basically what this is, corporate responsibility is a model, a strategy that aligns a business desire for social good, incorporates it into the competitive advantage, that it's not just what we've been doing for 25, 30 years of it being PR based, right? I mean, corporate involvement has been too long focused on what is the PR that I get, as opposed to how our work in those, that working with nonprofits actually enhances our competitive advantage. So we have a lot of handouts on this. If you want to talk more, if you want more information on how a nonprofit can better prepare itself to talk in these terms of competitive advantage with a business and aligning it, which we think is, if you want to get more corporate business, this is the way you have to go. You have to show how your nonprofit will better align with that nonprofit, that for-profit business, trying to enhance its competitive advantage, not just a PR opportunity. And every time when I brought this next slide up, every time I bring this next slide up, I usually get a giggle. Enhance government productivity. I always get a giggle. Really got a giggle when we were doing it with the South Carolina Grant Makers Alliance. But I think that we have to think about this. The reason that we need to think about this is because a lot of the local governments, school systems receive a lot of funding related to fiscal funding that is going away at the end of this fiscal year, the end of 2020, June of 2025, that they're going to be out looking for more money, more funding to fill that gap that's going on. So right now, with the current situation, is we most likely going to be nonprofits competing with local governments on trying to fill the gap that's going to happen. So as opposed to creating a better collaborative environment, we think that it's going to be a more competitive environment. And the ultimate solution, which is way beyond this call, is that we think government has to be more productive. So ultimately, and then partnering to increase the impact so that more funds pass through to the nonprofits that can more effectively make the change that's needed than the government. So if you want to have more giggles about how try to enhance government productivity, that's another one of my soapboxes. We don't have time to get into that. So what are your thoughts on these long-term strategies?
And Eric, we've just got 2 minutes. Any other overall observations? I'm a big timekeeper. I like to start on time and end on time because we all, but especially you, are busy people. So any like final concluding thoughts
And/or questions?
and our questions? And I am going to turn off recording just because I can. Maybe I can.